Saraya stood in the middle of the destroyed battlefield, her chest shaking as she breathed in the smoke that still floated above the broken ground. The sky was dark with gray clouds and burning ships, and everything around her smelled like fire, blood, and metal. She felt like the world had ended, because somewhere in this chaos, her little hybrid daughter Leary had disappeared, and no one could tell her where the child had gone. Soldiers moved around her, some carrying wounded fighters, some crying, some shouting orders, but Saraya heard nothing except the pounding of her own heart. She kept whispering Leary's name again and again, hoping the child would answer, hoping a small voice would rise from the ruins and call out Mama, but the battlefield stayed silent. And that silence hurt more than any wound could ever hurt her. Leary was different from the others, born half alien and half human. A child many people hated because they believed she did not belong to either side. Saraya had protected her from the whispers, the insults, the stares, and she had promised her daughter that no matter what happened, she would always find her, always hold her, always keep her safe. But now Saraya felt like she had failed that promise. Her hands shook as she walked through crushed metal, burned armor, and fallen bodies, searching for even the smallest sign of her child. Her heart felt heavier with every step she took. It felt like someone had removed the light from her life, leaving her alone in endless darkness. She reached a place where she had last seen Leary running when the enemy fighters arrived. She remembered shouting for her daughter to hide, remembered the sound of explosions, remembered the scream Leary made before she disappeared into the smoke. Saraya pushed aside broken weapons and pieces of ground armor, her fingers bleeding from the sharp edges. And then she saw it, Leary's small pendant, broken, covered in dust, lying on the cold ground like a piece of her daughter's heart. Saraya's legs gave up and she fell to her knees, shaking as she lifted the pendant with trembling fingers. Her voice cracked as she whispered her daughter's name, and tears rolled down her face, leaving dark lines on her skin. In that moment, she believed her daughter was gone forever, taken by the battle, taken by fate, taken by cruelty. Saraya cried, not caring who saw her, not caring if enemies even walked near her. Her pain was too deep, too sharp, too real. She pressed the pendant to her forehead and closed her eyes, remembering Leary's laugh, the way the child held her finger tightly, the way she smiled with her human eyes and alien markings glowing softly on her cheeks. Saraya felt like the universe had crushed her heart with one hand. She whispered, "My baby, where are you?" But the battlefield only answered with smoke and silence. Then suddenly, a loud shout broke the air. Alien soldiers dragged someone across the broken ground. Saraya lifted her head, her eyes red and tired. The soldiers were bringing in a wounded human. His armor cracked, his face covered in blood and dirt, but his eyes still open, still alive. Saraya felt anger rise inside her. Humans had caused so much pain, so much death, and now one of them was being brought right into her path. She stood up, ready to walk away, not wanting to see another human face on this cursed day. But then the wounded man lifted his hand weakly toward her. His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper, but Saraya heard it clearly through all the noise around them. "You need to see this," he said. His tone was not threatening, not mocking, not cruel. It sounded desperate, honest, almost gentle. Saraya froze, her heart skipped a beat. Why would a human soldier speak to her like that? Why would he reach for her? Why would he say those words? The soldiers holding him looked confused too. One of them said he kept repeating the same message since they found him crawling near the smoke line. Saraya walked closer, unsure if she wanted answers or if she was simply lost in exhaustion and grief. When she stood in front of him, the human soldier looked up into her eyes. His gaze was full of something she did not expect. It was not hate, not fear, but something else, something heavy and urgent. He opened his hand, trying to give her something, but his fingers slipped and he collapsed to the ground. If Soraya had not caught him, he would have fallen face first into the dirt. She knelt beside him, wondering why she was helping a human at all. But something in his words stayed inside her mind like a burning spark. You need to see this. Why her? Why those words? What did he know? She told the soldiers to bring him to the medical camp. They argued at first, saying humans could not be trusted. But Soraya shouted that he had information she needed. And they finally obeyed, as they lifted the wounded man. Soraya held Leary's broken pendant in her hand. Her heart hurt less for a moment, not because the pain was gone, but because a small piece of hope had returned. If this human had something to show her, something she needed to see, then maybe, just maybe, her daughter was not gone. Maybe the universe had not taken everything from her. She followed the soldiers slowly, the battlefield still burning behind her. But her steps felt different now. They were not the steps of a mother who had lost everything. They were the steps of a mother who would tear the entire galaxy apart if it meant finding her child again. Starts the moment the human veteran is taken to the medical tent, and Soraya follows with a heart full of fear and a spark of hope. She holds her daughter's broken pendant so tightly that the metal edges cut into her palm. But she does not loosen her grip. The battlefield is still burning behind her. Yet her focus is only on the human soldier who whispered those strange, painful words. You need to see this. She walks faster, ignoring the shouts of soldiers and the sound of collapsing metal. She needs answers. She needs truth. She needs even the smallest chance that her daughter Leary might still be alive somewhere in this cruel world. Inside the medical tent, medics rush around the wounded human, cutting open his broken armor and trying to stop the bleeding. Some medics hesitate, their faces tense, because helping a human enemy feels wrong to them. But Soraya steps forward with fiery eyes and orders them to continue. No one dares to argue with a mother who is grieving and desperate. They obey her quietly, working faster, trying to save the life of the man who might know something about the missing hybrid child. Soraya stands near his bed, watching his chest rise and fall in uneven breaths. She feels frustrated because time feels slow, like the universe is holding its breath and refusing to give her any answers. Her fingers shake as she presses the broken pendant to her lips, whispering Leary's name again and again, hoping that somewhere out there, her daughter might feel her voice through the stars. The medics finally stabilize the human, and one of them tells Soraya that he needs rest before he can speak. But Soraya shakes her head and commands them to wake him. She cannot wait. Not when her child's life might depend on a single piece of information. The medics give him a mild shock to bring him back to consciousness. His eyes open slowly, filled with pain, but when he sees Soraya standing there, something like relief flashes across his face. It confuses her, because she cannot understand why a human soldier would feel relieved to see an alien mother looking down at him. He coughs, wheezing, trying to speak. Soraya leans closer, her voice trembling as she asks, "What did you see? What happened to my daughter?" He tries to lift his hand, so Soraya helps him, guiding his fingers toward a small pouch tied to his armor. Inside is a tiny device, no bigger than a stone. When Soraya activates it, a hologram flickers to life, showing blurry images filled with smoke and shadows. She watches as a group of masked soldiers move across the battlefield, carrying a small figure in their arms. The figure is too tiny to be an adult, and Soraya's breath stops when she sees the faint glow on the child's cheeks. The same glow her hybrid daughter had. It is Leary, scared, crying, alive. Soraya's legs weaken, and she grips the medical bed for support. Her eyes fill with tears again, but this time they are tears of shock. Hope and terror all mixed together. The human soldier watches her silently, giving her a moment to understand what she is seeing. After a few seconds he whispers, "She was taken. Not killed." His voice is weak, but the words hit Soraya like a storm and shake her entire soul. She falls to her knees and covers her mouth to stop herself from screaming with emotion. Her daughter is alive, but she is in danger. Terrible danger. Soraya looks up at the human with fierce eyes, demanding to know who took Leary. The man takes a slow breath and explains that a special extraction team stole her. Not for ransom or revenge, but for something far worse. He tells Soraya that hybrid children are rare, powerful, and some military factions want to use them for secret experiments. Experiments that could change the war or destroy everything. Soraya trembles, imagining her daughter trapped in a dark lab, alone and terrified. She swears she will tear apart every wall, every guard, every enemy until she finds her child. The human soldier coughs again, blood staining his lips, but he forces himself to speak. He tells Soraya that he followed the kidnappers for as long as he could, crawling through smoke and debris, ignoring his wounds. Until they reached the edge of the battlefield. He says he couldn't reach them, but he marked the place where they disappeared. He whispers the coordinates to Soraya and draws a small map on a torn piece of cloth. His hand shakes, but he doesn't stop until he finishes. When he hands the cloth to Soraya, he says in a quiet voice, "I promised myself I would not let a child suffer like that again." Soraya looks at him, confused, wondering what his past holds, what pain he carries, why he cares so much, but she pushes these questions aside, because her mind is focused only on one thing now: finding Leary. She asks him if he will guide her to the place where he last saw the child, and the human nods, even though he can barely move. Soraya protests, telling him he is wounded, but he shakes his head and insists that if he does not go with her, she will face danger she cannot see coming. Soraya feels something unexpected inside her, something she never thought she would feel toward a human. She feels trust, a small but undeniable spark of trust. She nods slowly and says, "Then we go together." The human gives her a faint, tired smile, and Soraya holds the broken pendant tightly once more. Her grief has turned into strength now, her fear into determination. With the human soldier by her side and a faint trail to follow, she steps out of the medical tent into the smoky air, ready to chase the last hope she has left in the galaxy. Night fell slowly over the war-torn land as Soraya and the human veteran, Rowan, prepared to leave the camp. The sky glowed with fading firelight, and the cold wind carried dust from broken structures. Soraya wrapped her torn cloak around herself and looked at the small map Rowan had drawn. Her hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the deep, burning hope that her daughter was alive somewhere in this darkness. Rowan walked beside her, his injuries aching with every step. But he didn't complain. He moved like a soldier who had nothing left to lose. And Soraya noticed that quiet heaviness in his eyes every time he looked at the broken battlefield behind them. They traveled carefully, staying low, hiding behind fallen metal walls and cracked ground shields. Rowan explained that masked soldiers rarely left clear trails. They were trained to disappear. But Leary was a child, frightened and crying. And frightened children always leave signs. Soraya followed every footprint, every broken branch, every claw mark on the ground that her daughter might have made. It felt like Leary was whispering to her through these small clues, urging her to keep going, to not give up. Soraya felt her strength grow with every tiny sign she found. As they walked deeper into the ruins, Rowan suddenly stopped and raised his hand. Soraya froze, her heart pounding loudly in her chest. Rowan pointed at the ground where strange footprints pressed into the mud. They were not human footprints, but they were not fully alien either. They were something in between. Something unnatural. Rowan knelt slowly, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and touched the faint prints. His voice became tense as he explained that these were made by enhanced soldiers. Bodies changed through science to track hybrids. Soraya's heart tightened with horror. She imagined her small daughter surrounded by those half-machine creatures. and she whispered Leary's name under her breath, afraid to even hear her own voice. Rowan looked around carefully and motioned for Soraya to follow him. They walked quietly, following the footprints through shattered halls and fallen towers. Soraya kept glancing at Rowan, noticing how calmly he moved despite his wounds. She finally asked why he cared so much, why he would risk his life for her child. Rowan didn't answer directly. He only said in a low, heavy voice that he had once failed to protect a child during another war, and that failure haunted him every night. Soraya saw a shadow in his eyes, a pain he carried like a scar, and for the first time in her life, she felt sympathy for a human soldier. As they moved between two broken steel structures, a small metallic click echoed above them. Rowan grabbed Soraya and pulled her behind a collapsed engine core. Soraya gasped, surprised by his strength despite his injuries. Rowan pointed upward. His eyes narrow, drones, small, silent and deadly, floated through the night air searching for something. Their red lights scanned the ground for movement. Soraya held her breath, pressing her back against the metal. Rowan whispered that these drones belonged to the same group that took Leary. They were watching the battlefield closely, waiting for anyone trying to follow the child's trail. The drones passed slowly, their lights sweeping dangerously close. Rowan motioned for Soraya to stay still. His hand rested protectively near her shoulder, ready to pull her to safety if needed. After several long minutes, the drones drifted away into the smoke-covered sky. Soraya exhaled shakily, feeling her heartbeat return to her chest. Rowan stood up slowly, gripping his side from the pain. But he forced a small smile. "We keep moving," he whispered. And Soraya nodded. They continued north, heading toward a destroyed bridge that Rowan remembered seeing before he collapsed earlier that day. When they reached the bridge, they found more signs. Broken stones, disturbed sand, and most importantly, a small piece of cloth stuck between two rocks. Soraya's breath caught when she saw the familiar blue color. Leary's dress had been blue. She reached out with trembling hands and took the cloth. Pressing it against her face, it smelled faintly like her daughter, like the little child she used to hold close at night. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of hope rather than despair. Rowan watched her quietly, giving her space, knowing how much this small piece of fabric meant to her. As Soraya wiped her tears, Rowan suddenly stiffened. He crouched low and whispered for her to do the same. He pointed toward a deep trench ahead, where metal beams covered an entrance that seemed freshly opened. A faint light flickered from within, and distant voices echoed softly. Soraya's heart raced. She recognized the tone of those voices. They were the same masked soldiers from the hologram. Rowan whispered that this trench might lead to an underground facility that the enemy faction used for secret operations. Soraya's pulse quickened as she realized that Leary might be inside that hidden place. Alone and terrified, Rowan placed a hand gently on Soraya's arm. His voice soft but serious. He told her that once they went inside, they would face dangers unlike anything on the battlefield. He said she needed to stay close to him and trust his instructions. Soraya nodded, clutching the piece of Leary's cloth tightly in her hand. She whispered her daughter's name again, promising she was coming, promising she would never stop fighting. Together, they moved toward the hidden entrance, stepping into the cold, metallic shadows of the underground unknown, unaware of the dark secrets waiting for them below, but ready to face everything as long as it brought them closer to Leary, their last light in a dying world. Soraya and Rowan stepped quietly through the narrow opening in the collapsed trench. The metal beams above their heads creaked as if warning them not to enter. But Soraya didn't care. Her daughter was somewhere inside this underground place, and nothing in the galaxy could stop her from going forward. Rowan walked slightly ahead, his hand resting against the wall to steady himself because his wounds were still fresh. Even though he was hurting, he kept his voice calm as he whispered instructions to Soraya. Telling her where to place her feet and where to stay low, she followed him closely, her heart pounding in her ears with every step they took deeper into the earth. The air inside the hidden facility felt cold and strange. It smelled like chemicals, old metal, and something else Soraya couldn't describe, something that made her skin crawl. The walls were covered with pale lights that flickered weakly, casting long shadows that made the corridor look endless. Every echo sounded like footsteps behind them. Every noise made Soraya turn her head, thinking she might see Leary running toward her, calling her name. But all she found was silence and the echo of their own breathing, bouncing back from the walls. As they moved deeper, Rowan stopped suddenly. Holding his hand up to warn Soraya, she froze, watching as Rowan examined the ground carefully. His eyes followed a thin line of dried blood that ran along the metal floor. Soraya's heart dropped. The blood trail was tiny, too small to belong to an adult, and she felt tears sting her eyes as she whispered Leary's name under her breath. Rowan placed a hand gently on her shoulder and reassured her that this trail meant the child had passed through here recently, which meant she was still alive. The thought brought Soraya a sharp, painful hope that made her legs shake. Nearby, a door stood half open, its lights blinking red as if it had been forced. Rowan moved toward it, pulling a small device from his pocket. He scanned the edges of the doorframe, then nodded for Soraya to follow him inside. The room they entered was dim and filled with old machines, metal cages and broken monitors. Some cages were empty. Some still held torn blankets and small toys. Soraya felt her stomach twist when she realized this was not just a hiding place. It was a holding room for children, hybrid children like Leary. Her hands trembled as she picked up a small wooden block from the floor, its edges smooth as if a child had played with it until their tiny fingers hurt. Rowan watched her silently, his jaw clenched. He told her that this facility had been shut down years ago, or at least everyone believed it was. Official reports claimed the experiments were stopped, that all hybrid children were returned to their families. But Rowan had never trusted those reports. He had suspected a secret group kept everything running in the shadows. And now, seeing this room, he knew he had been right. Soraya felt anger burn inside her like a storm. How could anyone take children, experiment on them, force them to live in cages? She pressed the wooden block to her chest and swallowed her tears, promising silently that she would never let Leary suffer here. Suddenly, a long alarm buzzed through the facility. The lights on the walls shifted from pale white to flashing red. Rowan grabbed Soraya's hand instantly, pulling her behind a large machine. They crouched low as the hallway outside filled with mechanical sounds. Security bots rolled past the door, scanning the room for movement. Their glowing sensors swept across the floor, inches away from Rowan's leg. Soraya held her breath so tightly she felt her chest ache. Rowan stayed perfectly still, his hand gripping her shoulder protectively. The bots lingered for several seconds that felt like hours, then finally rolled away, heading deeper into the facility when the danger passed. Soraya exhaled shakily and looked at Rowan. He whispered urgently that alarms meant someone had detected their presence. They had very little time before soldiers or more machines arrived. Soraya nodded, her fear rising again, but Rowan tightened his grip on her arm, giving her a look filled with determination. He told her that they were close, that the blood trail was fresh, that the kidnappers wouldn't risk staying too deep inside. Soraya swallowed her fear and forced herself to stand. She reminded herself of Leary's smile, Leary's laugh, Leary's tiny hands reaching for her. Those memories gave her power when everything else around her felt dark. They followed the trail through another hallway, this one deeper and colder. The lights here were almost dead, and the air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on their chests. At the end of the hall, they found a large reinforced door. Thicker and stronger than the others, it hummed with energy. Guarded by 2 inactive defense drones that looked like they could wake up at any moment. Rowan approached the door slowly, examining the control panel beside it. Soraya watched anxiously as he connected his device and tried to bypass the lock. Sparks flickered from the panel and the screen flashed warning symbols. Soraya whispered if it was dangerous. Rowan gave a small smile. Saying everything in this place was dangerous, but they didn't have a choice. With a sharp click, the lock disengaged. The heavy door opened halfway. Metal grinding loudly as if resisting the idea of letting them inside, Soraya stepped forward. Her heart racing so fast she felt lightheaded. Rowan followed her, ready to shield her from whatever waited in the next room. When Soraya entered, she gasped. The room was filled with glowing screens showing maps, data logs, and medical files. And in the center of the room were several empty restraints built for children. Soraya felt sick as she touched one gently, imagining her daughter trapped there, alone and crying. She clenched her fist so hard her nails dug into her palms. Her voice shook as she whispered, "Leary, Mama is coming for you," before Rowan could respond. The alarms shifted pitch, becoming louder, sharper. Soldiers shouted in the distance, boots stomping against the metal floors. Rowan met Soraya's eyes with a fierce, unspoken promise. He whispered that they had to move now, or they would never reach Leary. Soraya nodded with trembling determination. Together, they turned toward the next door deeper inside the facility, ready to face whatever darkness waited. Because at the end of that darkness was a child who needed her mother, and a mother who would burn the galaxy to bring her home. Soraya and Rowan moved quickly into the next corridor, the alarms ringing like angry metal screams behind them. The lights flickered above their heads, throwing long shadows across the cold steel floor. Soraya's heart thumped wildly, but her steps grew faster and stronger. Every second felt important now. Every breath felt like it carried her closer to her child or farther away. Rowan stayed at her side despite the pain in his ribs, guiding her through the twisting hallways with a soldier's steady instincts. His face was tense, focused, ready to fight again, even though his body was barely holding together. They reached a narrow passage where the walls were covered with glowing screens. Most were cracked or dark, but a few flickered with images of maps and data logs. Rowan stopped at one of the working screens and tapped it with the end of his device. Soraya leaned close, squinting at the unfamiliar symbols and numbers. Rowan explained in a low voice that the screen showed movement inside the facility. Red dots marked the soldiers and machines, and a single blue dot marked something small, fragile, and moving slowly. Soraya's breath caught in her chest as she watched the tiny blue dot. It had to be Leary. It just had to be her. Rowan nodded, confirming her fear and hope at the same time. The kidnappers were taking the child to a deeper chamber, maybe to move her out of the facility or prepare her for something worse. Soraya felt fear climb up her throat like a burning flame, but she forced it down. Her daughter needed her to be strong. Rowan sensed her trembling and placed his hand briefly on her back, a quiet gesture of support that surprised Soraya with how human it felt. He whispered that they would reach Leary before the soldiers did whatever they planned. Soraya nodded firmly, clutching the small piece of Leary's dress in her hand, as if holding it kept her daughter close. They continued forward, turning into a wider hallway with tall metal pillars. The floor was smooth and shiny, reflecting the red alarm lights in distorted shapes. Suddenly, voices echoed ahead, deep and sharp. Rowan quickly pushed Soraya against a pillar. Pressing a finger to his lips, 2 armored soldiers walked past, carrying weapons that hummed with energy. Their faces were hidden behind black masks with glowing red eyes. Soraya held her breath as the soldiers marched deeper into the facility. Their footsteps faded after a few tense seconds, and Rowan signaled her to continue. As they reached the next room, Soraya stopped suddenly. Her hands flew to her mouth as she stared at the sight in front of her. The room was filled with medical tables and machines with sharp metal arms. Some arms held empty vials. Others held restraints for tiny limbs. Rowan stepped beside her, his jaw tightening as he whispered the truth. This room had been used for experiments on hybrid children. Soraya felt her knees weaken as she imagined Leary lying on one of those tables, crying for her mother. Alone in the cold and surrounded by strangers who saw her as nothing more than a tool. She pressed her hand against one of the cold tables, imagining her daughter's warmth there. And she felt something inside her shift. Her grief hardened into anger. Powerful and fierce, Rowan watched her quietly, understanding the fire in her eyes without needing to hear her words. He told her that Leary's blood was the reason these groups hunted hybrid children. Their unique DNA held resistance to a bioweapon that could destroy millions. Some wanted to use hybrid children to cure worlds. Others wanted to twist the same resistance into something deadly. Soraya shook her head in horror, wondering how anyone could think of using children in such a cruel way. She whispered, half to herself and half to Rowan, that Leary was just a child. She liked soft blankets, shiny stones, and warm milk before sleep. She didn't understand war or weapons or power. Rowan listened quietly, his jaw clenched, as Soraya spoke. He finally revealed something she had felt hiding beneath his quietness. He admitted that years ago, during another war, he had failed to protect a hybrid child, a little boy who had trusted him. The child was taken by the same kind of group that now had Leary. Rowan never saw the boy again, and the memory had haunted him since. Soraya looked at him with softened eyes, realizing he carried a wound as deep as hers. But from a different world, before she could speak. A sudden blast shook the room. The lights flickered violently. Rowan grabbed Soraya's arm and pulled her to cover behind a fallen machine. More security bots rolled into the hallway outside, their mechanical voices echoing as they scanned for intruders. Rowan grimaced as he pulled a small explosive device from his belt. He whispered to Soraya that they needed to disable the bots quickly before the soldiers arrived. Soraya nodded, wiping her tears and standing tall, her voice steady as she told Rowan she was ready. Rowan threw the explosive device a few meters ahead. The small spark it released confused the sensors of the bots, causing them to slow and glitch. Rowan charged forward with surprising energy, knocking two bots down with swift, practiced motions. Soraya grabbed the heavy metal tool from the table behind her and struck another bot that approached. Her movements were fueled by desperation and love for her daughter. Together, they managed to destroy the last of the bots, breathing heavily as the room fell silent again. Rowan leaned against the wall, panting and gripping his injured side. Soraya rushed to him, supporting his weight with her arm. He gave her a faint smile and whispered that she was stronger than most soldiers he had fought beside. Soraya felt warmth touch her heart, but she pushed those emotions aside. There was no time for anything except saving Leary. They stepped through another doorway that led to a descending corridor. The lights glowed cold and pale, and the sound of distant machinery grew louder. Rowan whispered that this was the final path to the deeper chambers, and that Leary had to be somewhere close. Soraya's breath trembled as she imagined her daughter sitting alone in a cold room, waiting for her mother. As they walked, the air became colder and heavier. Every step echoed like a heartbeat. At the end of the corridor, they saw another heavy metal door, thicker than the rest. A large symbol marked on it read, "Bio Sample, Hybrid." Soraya's fingers tightened around Leary's cloth, her whole body shaking with fear, anger, and hope. Rowan placed a hand on the door and whispered that this was it, that the next room would decide everything. Soraya swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and stepped forward with the courage of a mother ready to face the universe. All she cared about was reaching her child before it was too late. And nothing in this cruel facility would stop her now. Soraya stood before the heavy metal door. Her heart beating so fast, it felt like it might break through her chest. The cold air of the underground chamber wrapped around her like a warning, whispering that danger waited on the other side. Rowan stayed beside her, breathing heavily, his wounded body barely holding on. But his eyes were sharp, focused, determined. He placed his hand slowly against the door's surface, feeling the faint vibration of machinery behind it. He whispered that this part of the facility was the deepest, the most secret, the place where only the highest-ranking soldiers were allowed to enter. Soraya swallowed hard, fear and hope twisting inside her like fire and ice. Rowan typed something on the control pad, but the door didn't open fully. It slid only halfway before groaning to a stop, stuck halfway due to damage from earlier explosions. Soraya squeezed through first, her hands brushing against the cold metal. Rowan pushed himself through after her, wincing from the pain that shot through his ribs. Inside, the air was colder than before. So cold it felt like walking into a room built for machines instead of living beings. The lights here were dim, pale blue instead of red, casting a ghostly glow across the long corridor ahead. Soraya stepped forward carefully, her senses sharp. Her heart whispered that her daughter was close, very close. She looked at the ground and noticed small scuff marks. Tiny footprints, so small they could only belong to a child. Soraya's breath caught in her throat. Her knees weakened, and tears filled her eyes. Leary had walked here, right through this corridor. Rowan saw the footprints too, and nodded quietly. He whispered that they were on the right path. Closer than ever before, Soraya touched the prints gently, feeling the small size of the marks, imagining her daughter's trembling steps as she was led deeper inside. They followed the trail until they reached a split in the corridor. Rowan checked his device again, the blue dot blinking faintly on the screen. He pointed to the left path, whispering that the signal came from there, but before they could move, a deep mechanical sound echoed from the right. Soraya froze. The noise grew louder, like heavy wheels rolling over metal. Rowan grabbed her arm and pulled her behind a large pillar. A moment later, a massive security unit rolled into view, its body built of dark metal, its eyes glowing bright red, its arms armed with stun weapons strong enough to paralyze a full-grown soldier in seconds. Soraya held her breath, praying the machine wouldn't detect them. Rowan stayed perfectly still, even as sweat rolled down his face from the pain in his ribs. The machine scanned the corridor slowly, its sensors humming in the silence. Soraya's hands shook, afraid that even the sound of her heartbeat might give them away. Finally, after several long seconds, the machine turned and rolled away. Disappearing into the darkness, Rowan let out a long breath, whispering that they had to move quickly before more machines arrived. They continued down the left path until the corridor opened into a wide chamber. Rows of glowing tubes lined the walls, filled with strange liquids. Inside some tubes floated small holographic devices playing medical data. Soraya felt sick as she walked past them, imagining how easily her daughter could have been inside one of those cold chambers. Rowan picked up one of the data tablets from a table and scanned it. His face turned pale. He whispered that this room recorded the health of every hybrid child the group had taken over the years. Soraya stared at the screens, horrified, dozens of names flashing, dozens of children stolen for experiments. It felt like the world around her was breaking piece by piece. But then Rowan pressed a button on the tablet and a new screen opened. Displaying the most recent entry, Soraya leaned forward, her heart skipping. It showed a name, her daughter's name. Leary, age, 6 cycles, status, alive. Condition, frightened but stable. Soraya covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears she could not hold back. She whispered her daughter's name over and over, each whisper filled with both relief and pain. Rowan touched her shoulder gently, reminding her that Leary was near. that this was their moment to reach her before she could be moved again. They followed another hallway until they reached a large metal door with heavy locks. The label beside it glowed with chilling blue letters, Biosample, Hybrid 7. Soraya felt her entire body tremble. This was it. This door stood between her and her child. Rowan stepped forward, but his hands shook too much to open the panel. Soraya gently moved him aside. Placing her palm on the cold surface, she whispered, "Leary, Mama is here." And it felt like her voice filled the entire chamber. Rowan managed to override the lock. Sparks flickered, and the door hissed open slowly. A soft blue light spilled out from the room. Soraya stepped inside, her breath trapped in her chest. Rowan stayed behind her, watching the shadows carefully for danger. Inside the room sat a small glowing platform. And on that platform, curled up and shaking, was a tiny figure with familiar glowing marks on her cheeks. "Leary," Soraya gasped, her legs almost giving out beneath her. Her child was right there, alive, scared, holding her knees tightly to her chest. Rowan motioned that he needed to check the room first, but Soraya couldn't wait. She rushed forward, tears falling freely, whispering her daughter's name again and again like a prayer that had finally been answered. Leary looked up slowly, her eyes wide, and when she saw her mother, she let out a small broken cry. Soraya's heart shattered and healed at the same time. She reached out her arms, ready to gather her baby back into the warmth she had been missing. But just as she touched Leary's hand, a faint alarm beeped somewhere behind them. Rowan's voice turned sharp as he whispered that soldiers were coming. The moment of reunion was here, but danger was closing in fast. And their fight was far from over. Soraya didn't waste a second. She pulled Leary into her arms the moment she reached her, wrapping the trembling child tightly against her chest. The warmth of Leary's small body felt unreal after so many hours of fear and darkness. Leary clung to her mother with shaking hands, her tiny fingers gripping Soraya's torn clothing as if she was afraid Soraya might vanish again. Soraya pressed her cheek against Leary's soft hair, breathing in the familiar scent she thought she had lost forever. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, every tear a release of all the pain, fear, and hope that had carried her through this nightmare. "Mama, I was scared," Leary whispered in a small broken voice. Soraya's heart cracked completely at the sound. She kissed Leary's forehead again and again, whispering that she was here now, that she would never leave, that everything would be okay. But Rowan's sharp voice cut through the moment. Not out of coldness but urgency, he whispered that soldiers were moving fast, their footsteps echoing back through the corridors like thunder rolling through a cave. Soraya looked at Rowan, her tears still fresh, and nodded with fierce determination. She knew the reunion wasn't over, it had only begun. Now she had to protect her daughter and escape this place alive. Rowan scanned the room quickly, checking for hidden sensors or traps. He motioned for Soraya to move behind him, his voice low as he explained that the soldiers would enter the hallway any second. Soraya held Leary close, covering the child with her arms. She felt her daughter's heartbeat against her chest. Fast and frightened, but alive, Rowan limped toward the doorway. Gripping his weapon tightly, his injury made him stumble. But his eyes were sharp with the strength of someone who refused to fall while a child's life depended on him. The first security soldier appeared at the end of the corridor, armored from head to toe. With glowing red eyes behind a dark mask, Rowan fired quickly, the blast hitting the soldier's shoulder and spinning him backward. Alarms blared louder, and the corridor filled with the metallic echo of approaching troops. Soraya felt fear spike in her chest, but when she looked down at Leary's face, something inside her changed. Her fear melted into fire, a cold, burning fire that pushed her forward. She placed Leary gently behind a stack of heavy crates, telling her to stay small, stay quiet, stay brave. Leary nodded, tears in her wide eyes, but she trusted her mother completely. The second wave of soldiers rushed into the hallway. Rowan fired again but stumbled when pain from his wounds shot through him like knives. Soraya grabbed a fallen metal bar from the floor. Gripping it tightly, her voice steady as she whispered, "For my child." Then she swung with all the strength she had left. The metal bar struck the soldier's helmet, sending sparks flying and knocking him off balance. Rowan pushed off the wall, finishing the strike with a quick blow that deactivated the soldier's armor core. For a moment, silence fell again, but they both knew it wouldn't last long. Rowan leaned heavily against the wall, breathing hard. Soraya rushed to him, worry filling her eyes, but he shook his head, insisting he could still move. He whispered that they needed to reach the emergency exit tunnel in the west wing. It was the only passage that didn't seal itself when alarms activated. Soraya scooped Leary into her arms again, holding her close, and followed Rowan through another door that led to a narrow maintenance corridor. The walls here were old and rusted, the lights flickering weakly, but Soraya didn't care. Every step she took carried her daughter farther away from danger. They moved as fast as they could, Rowan limping, Soraya clutching Leary against her shoulder. Leary kept whispering softly that she was scared, and Soraya kissed her hair, whispering that she was safe now, that Mama was here, that nothing would hurt her again. But the facility shook suddenly as explosions detonated somewhere behind them. The soldiers were trying to cut off escape routes. Rowan looked over his shoulder and cursed softly, urging Soraya to keep moving. He led her through a narrow passage filled with pipes and wires. The air hot and thick, Soraya felt sweat on her forehead. But she didn't slow down. She tightened her hold on Leary and kept going. At the end of the passage, they reached a sealed grate. Rowan dropped to his knees, pulling tools from his belt. His hands were shaking from exhaustion, but he kept working. Sparks falling around him as he forced the grate loose. Soraya placed Leary down gently beside her, shielding the girl with her arm as she watched Rowan fight to open their way out. She wanted to help, but she also didn't want to leave Leary unprotected even for a moment. When the grate finally popped open, Rowan sagged forward, barely able to breathe. Soraya grabbed his arm and helped him stand, keeping her daughter close as she stepped into the dark tunnel beyond. The tunnel was cold and silent, except for the distant echo of sirens fading behind them. Soraya held Leary on her hip, Rowan walking beside them like a broken warrior who still refused to fall. After several minutes, a faint light appeared ahead. Daylight, real daylight. Soraya's throat tightened. She could almost taste freedom. Rowan collapsed to his knees near the exit. His strength finally giving out, Soraya rushed to him, shaking him gently. But he smiled tiredly and pointed at the exit, telling her to take Leary outside first. Soraya placed her hand on his cheek, thanking him with tears in her voice, then carried Leary toward the sunlight breaking through the open ground above. When they stepped outside, Soraya breathed in the fresh air with trembling relief. She held Leary close, whispering prayers of gratitude. Rowan crawled out moments later. Bloody, exhausted, but alive, he sat in the sunlight, smiling weakly as he watched Soraya and Leary hold each other. Soraya looked at him with new eyes now. Eyes that held respect, gratitude, and something softer too. She asked him why he had helped her so much, why he risked his life again and again for her child. Rowan looked down for a moment, then lifted his gaze and whispered the words that had haunted him for years. Because no child deserves to be alone in a war. Soraya felt her heart soften. She stepped closer and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, thanking him with a deep sincerity that words could barely hold. Leary peeked over her mother's shoulder and gave Rowan a small, shy smile. Rowan smiled back, tears filling his tired eyes. The sun rose slowly above them, lighting the sky in soft gold. And for the first time since the battle began, Soraya felt warmth that wasn't from fire. She felt hope, real hope. With Leary in her arms and Rowan beside her, she stepped into the new dawn, ready to build a future where no one would ever take her child again, ready to fight for a world where hybrids could live in peace. The danger behind them was real, but the love they carried forward was stronger. And together, they walked into the light, leaving the darkness of the underground forever behind.